All right, hi everyone. Welcome to the World Environment Week conversations. I'm here on day 3 with another awesome human to interview. I'd like to say welcome to Ben Francischelli. Ben, thank you for giving up your time today and joining us. We're really looking forward to it.
Look, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk.
And you might get a bit of a clue what we'll be talking about. Whales and dolphins will stick there and there, but
the best animals on the planet,
they're just
by far.
Amazing, aren't they? Yeah. I know. I'm so jealous of your mug, I have to say. Ben, tell us what is actually your job. What do you do?
Yeah, so my job is to basically go out into the field, find specimens of scientific interest of a paleontological nature, so specimens that are millions of years old. I then bring them back into the lab of Museums Victoria. I prepare them chemically and mechanically, and then I collaborate with other researchers to try and figure out exactly what it is that we've found. And they range from ancient whales to sharks to giant wombat-like creatures that thundered across the lands tens of thousands of years ago to millions of years ago.
Wow, that's a pretty exciting job. Does that take you all across Victoria, or?
Yeah, it very much does. So we've been, so there's been a number of locations that we've had to go to. The Western Districts is about as far as you possibly can go. In Victoria now, down near Portland, there's a lot of really intriguing fossil deposits down there that yield a number of different whales. But you don't have to go that far. Sometimes you just have to go around the corner from Melbourne itself. My favorite is one called Bayside or Beaumaris.
Yeah.
And that's where you're finding the biggest aggregation of sharks and whale fossils in all of Australia, by far.
Wow. Why do you think that is?
I think pure luck has something to do with it as well. It's just that we have these huge sheer cliffs that kind of come up to a point, and you've got these erosive processes that are always acting on it. Whereas you look at other parts of the bay, especially the northern reaches of the bay, and you don't have those same similar kind of cliffs, or we did once upon a time. They're not there anymore. And the deposits range from about 5 to 6 million years of age, and they are fascinating. Like, they are beyond cool because we're getting one-of-a-kind animals. That some of the only place on the entire continent that we can find entire groups.
And this really helps to add to your knowledge of, the evolution of these incredible animals.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at paleontology as a whole, what we try to do is we try to understand the reason why animals are here. We try to understand the evolutionary nature of life itself. So, a lot of your viewers might be asking questions like, what's the point of paleontology? But those questions in the back of your mind, why are we here? How did we get here? They've been answered via the use of the fossil record, where we're apes that decided to climb out of the trees millions of years ago, and then we looked across the horizon, and then we never looked back. And we know that because of the fossil record. When we look at other groups of animals, for example, there was this incredible famous paleontologist, George Gaylord Simpson, in the mid-50s and 60s, and he looked at whales and he thought that he would never see a walking whale ancestor. But because of the fossil record in the 70s and 80s, we found it. And we know that whales, of course, they're mammals. They breathe air, they suckle their young with milk, they have blubber. They even have hair on the ends of their nose with tiny little follicles. He never thought we would ever see it. But because we've gone out there, we've launched expeditions, we've been able to find these walking whale ancestors. So it's very much completing the story of evolution of life on our planet as we know.
And I think it also, helps us to go forward and look after these animals, because we can see what, issues have affected them. So the whole climate change, we know that it's happened before, but we know that this time it's very, very different. And so it's having a much more accelerated effect on the animals. And we can see that from the fossil records.
Yeah, I mean, it's really intriguing to think of past extinction events and to gauge those. We wouldn't know that we're in an extinction event right now were it not for looking into the past and seeing the rate at which animals go extinct over many millennia. So that's a really important facet of paleontology as well.
So I know I've asked this question to everyone so far, and I've had it asked to myself, and I don't think there is a typical answer, but, what does a day for you look like when you're at work?
This is what I love about the job so much, because it is just, you wake up one day and it's just like, you have no idea. You might get a phone call going, hey, Ben, there was a person who was walking on the beach and they just came across a gigantic skull of a 20 million year old whale and it needs to be taken right now. You need to go. you know, and I'm just like, I'm totally there for that. I love the fact that it changes up from day to day. But you know, when I go into the lab, very much depends on the specimens that I'm preparing. And because we're finding new specimens almost every single week, it changes radically depending on their deposition and how they've been preserved as well. So I might go from preparing a gigantic wing bone from one of the largest flying birds that ever existed, which is a very tedious job with tiny little air jacks and a microscope in order to prep the actual matrix or the sediment away from it. And then I might take something out of the back of my car, get the trolley, and get these gigantic, heaping, huge vertebrae, bigger than my head, and then just have to scrub it with a toothbrush in order to get some of the live fauna off.
Oh, wow. That take a bit of time.
It's so tedious at times. Yeah, it's really tedious. Some of these things are just lying on the bottom of the sea floor. So understandably, there's a lot of things like coralline algae that aggregate on top of them, barnacles, that you just need to dislodge before you actually put them into the collection, because you don't want to put something in the collection that's going to stink out the collection.
Of course.
And then you've also got to adhere a number of different glues to the specimens to ensure that they look the same as 100 years time as they would right now. But I think very much for me, the absolute highlight is talking to members of the public and just gauging and seeing what they've found, because I work with an incredible group of science communicators and citizen scientists, and what they've been able to find is nothing short of breathtaking.
So citizen science is really important to you, people that are just out there and report things. It's obviously a growing area and something that all of my kids can get involved with, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the way in which these citizen scientists got involved was simply coming up to me and asking, after they went to the beach themselves, they went for a bit of a fossil hunt, and they picked up a bone and they said, "What is this?" And I said to them, "It's really interesting, actually. It looks like this." And then, sure enough, because I'm down at the beach quite often as well, if it's a good day and the weather's, permitting, I can go down to the beach at a whim, at the drop of a hat, and I can say, "Great."
Lucky.
That's just, part of the job. That's part of the nature of the job. If the weather's good, you get out there because it's not going to be found. That's just it. And so you bump into these people all the time, and then you start to build not just a relationship, but a friendship with them. And you start to realize, wow, these people are fantastic. And they have a certain knowledge of finding this material that is way better than I can sometimes. Like, they can just pick out the tiniest teeth from like 10 meters away. And no exaggeration at all. It's just like, wow, how did you even spot that? So yeah, working closely with them is really important to ensure that we continue to build the collection so that we can access it and keep it as a resource for future generations.
So you said that one of your highlights is talking to the public. Obviously, you meet people when you're out and about, but do you do any sort of formal sort of education with schools or adults? Do you do tours around the collections or anything like that?
Yeah, look, we do every now and again as well. Because my immediate role is very much orientated towards preparation and ensuring that I have to just go out there and get the specimens. It doesn't leave that much room for doing things like that, unfortunately. I very much want to. Like, that would just be fantastic if and that's something I'm very much trying to push for with all of this. And utilizing platforms like social media is one of those, next stage things as well. That is, I wouldn't say it's easy as such. Social media is never easy, but it's a really good step in the right direction to share what we've been able to find with members of the public who are excited by it, and let them know that we're out there and we're trying to find the material, and that if they find something, that they can come directly, not just to the museum, but they can come to someone like me, a paleontologist, and say, "This is what I found." And I go, "Wow, that is actually exciting." And then we can make a time to meet up and discuss the specimen that they've got.
Fantastic. I think you've got some pictures that you're going to share with us to talk a little bit about some of the marine mammals and maybe the evolution that you were talking about, because I do now add this into my talks, but a lot of people their faces are quite a picture when I say that the ancestors used to walk around on land, and they're sort of, huh, really? So could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. So I mentioned a little bit earlier about George Gaylord Simpson, a preeminent US paleontologist in the 1950s and 60s. And we know that whales came from land because they're mammals, and all mammals originated from a terrestrial origin, meaning a land-based origin. So they breathe air. They don't have gills. So they had to have come out onto the land and then go back into the water. the reason they did it is because there was nothing in the water at the time. There were sharks, sure, but animals like the mosasaurs and those marine reptiles, they were wiped out 15 million years earlier by the cataclysm that took the dinosaurs. And so there was this empty, vacant niche. And then there was this one creature in particular who decided, you know what I'm going to do? There seems to be a glut of food standing on the edge of the water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go eat the food that's in the water. And over successive generations, what happens is they basically turn into the whales that we can see today. Now, I'm just going to share a screen with you guys to show you what this animal would have looked like. There we go. So you can see that's Pakicetus. It's one of the oldest of the walking whales that we can find in the fossil record in the early Eocene, roughly 50 million years ago. And you look at it and it doesn't look like a whale at all. It's got 4 legs. It's got quite a dense coating of fur as well. We can't tell that from the fossil record, but looking at its previous ancestors and the fact that it's a mammal and that whales have hair today, it almost definitely would have had fur. But what we see is a number of different morphological characteristics that include this animal as a whale. And really importantly, a part of the ear bone called the tympanic bulla, which looks like this. And you can still find the tympanic bulla in whales today. Now, the tympanic bulla of this whale is incredibly small, but it has something called a lip to the bulla itself that identifies it as being a whale. And the other way in which you can tell is also in the ankles, because when you look at more obligately aquatic whales that started their dive back into the water roughly 40 million years ago, some of them still retain their ankle bones, right?
So cool.
And so if you look at the ankle bones of those whales, those intermediate forms, and the ones that lived 50 million years ago, they're practically identical. They're almost exactly the same. So it's very, very exciting. But for me, look, I focus on a very different era. So the oldest whales that I tend to deal with are roughly 23 to 25 million years of age.
Oh, pretty young then.
No, they're very young, actually. They're very strange as well, but primarily, like I said, the fossil site of Bayside, right? And Bayside is really, really important for a number of reasons, and I'll show you because these are some of the marine mammals that we've got there. So you're still seeing my screen right now?
Yep.
Fantastic. So you can get an idea of the huge size of some of the creatures from the site. I mean, look at the silhouette of the person running in the opposite direction there, like big. And specifically pay attention to the really big white whale just here, like Moby Dick kind of fame.
Yep.
And it's one of the biggest predators of all time. It really is an absolutely terrifying predator. And I'm going to show you another image just there. So in 2008, there were these Peruvian paleontologists that were walking in the Ica province, which is a massive desert in Peru. And they came across a slightly shattered skull sitting, eroding out of the dust. And when they looked closer, they realized that it was a skull of a toothed whale. There were anecdotal reports of a really big predator contemporaneous with that of the megalodon, but no one had ever found any real hardcore evidence for it. And then they found this, and it was they decided in 2010 to call it Leviathan, 17.5 meter long killer sperm whale, very different from modern sperm whales today because it has teeth not just on the lower jaws but also on the upper jaws as well. And the hypothesized diet of this creature is not squid but potentially other whales like baleen whales you can see in the image.
Wow, yeah. So really different. Wow.
Incredibly different. And then all of a sudden they went extinct and we don't know why at all. And so Bayside is one of those very last vestiges where we see these huge macroraptorial sperm whales on the planet. It's some of the oldest evidence on the planet for these creatures, and we're trying to figure out exactly why they went extinct. Super weird.
That's pretty crazy. I mean, it just seems like such a gentle place, doesn't it, Bayside, and it's got this incredible...
Yeah, I know. You see dolphins swim past every now and again. So you might get the straggling seal, It's a really calm place because when the northerly winds hit, it's as flat as a tack,
Yeah.
But 5 million years ago, it was a very different story, for sure.
Wow. And you said that skull was found in a desert. So presumably at some point, that was a sea.
Yes, it was. And you might think that's crazy, right? But... what was it, the beginning of the 1900s, there were some paleontologists that found these huge whales in the middle of the Egyptian desert. right? And they had no idea why or how they even got there in the first place. And they were just scratching their heads. Alfred Wegener in 1912 came up with a theory of continental drift. That, of course, being that the continents do move very, very slowly at the same rate as your fingernails grow every single year. But if you allow that to accumulate over millions of years, they're huge changes in the Earth's surfaces. And so where you once saw entire oceans, you may now see deserts. It's the same reason why you can find marine animals that once lived in the bottom of the seafloor right at the tip of Mount Everest as well.
I'm a rock climber, as one of the things I do, and I climb on limestone cliffs, you know, and have done when I'm back in the UK, and it's full of fossils, you know, and yet it's miles inland. So yeah, it's pretty incredible and really amazing to think that that was only discovered just over 100 years ago. You know, so it's really expanded our knowledge and made a lot of sense to things that people were finding through the 1800s and Charles Darwin.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when they first got them, they just had absolutely no idea what they were looking at, you know?
Yeah.
They just, you know, they called them the whale that they found in the middle of the Egyptian desert Basilosaurus, you know, and it's the least whale sounding name you could possibly imagine, you know? They clearly had no idea what they were dealing with as soon as they found it. But no, when you look at it, it is very characteristically a whale. There is no denying exactly what it is. And it's quite staggering because when you look at something like Pakicetus from 50 million years ago, this possible ancestor of all whales that live today, you know, it's getting to the size of a Labrador. But in less than 10 million years, it's getting to more than 18 meters in length. So it's a huge change in morphology for these creatures.
And in some ways, a very short time period, because obviously, you know, the sort of modern period is around 600 million years, but 50 is nothing really to go
it is
such
nothing
huge changes.
It's just it baffles the mind to think. And like I remember the very first time I was ever told that fact, you know, Ben, did you know that whales walked on land? And I was like, no, they didn't, of course. And I would have been in like year 8, so I would have been like 12, 13 years of age at the time. And then sure enough, I just Googled it and the teacher was right. And I was like, it's unbelievable to think that, especially when you look and you contrast it with the modern fauna of today. For your viewers, I know you know this, Mandy, but of course, you know, the blue whale is the biggest animal that has ever lived. It's twice the size of any of the long-necked dinosaurs. 180 metric tons. There are some reports of it being, you know, 210 metric tons. And that number doesn't seem like much, but that's 30 African elephants, you know, average size 6,000 kilogram African elephants stacked on top of each other. So when you go to the zoo, for example, you don't see an African elephant.
No, you don't.
You see an Asiatic elephant that's half the size of that, you know? So they're just incredibly massive. And to think that they came from land and they walked and were the size of Labradors 50 million years ago.
I know, it does, it blows your mind, but that's what science does for you. Would you say that sort of, you know, conversation when you said you were a year 8, did you think that really sort of shaped where you've ended up being today?
Very much so. There's only a few times in my life where I can remember that. When I was 4 years old, one of the very first books I was given was from my uncle, and it was entitled Life Before Man, 1976. And it just had these beautiful images, and they're completely wrong now.
Yes.
Dinosaurs standing like this, you know, with the straightest backs of all time. And I just remember looking through that, like, prodigiously, and I didn't stop looking at it. And I was just so fascinated by everything. I had a billion questions to ask. And there was this other teacher I remember as well in secondary school. And because I was really interested by whales, and I have been interested by whales my entire life. And, you know, the thought of them living on land is one thing. But, you know, I asked one teacher, and he said, I said to him, how big is a whale? And he said to me, Ben, we're on the basketball court right now. I want you to just run up and back. And I'm like, but I haven't done anything wrong. I don't want to run. And he's like, no, just trust me. Just run up and back, and I'll tell you afterwards. Okay? And I thought he was just being a hard ass. And he just didn't want to hear me at all.
Yeah.
I ran up to the basketball court, came back, and I was like, why'd you make me do that? And he's like, that's the size of a blue whale. And I went, wow. And I've never forgotten that. I've never forgotten it. And I went, it's just incredible and unfathomable. Like, still just, I can't find the words to quite describe it to this day, even though I've known of these facts for decades now. So I just find them so exciting.
I think that being scientists, you know, you still retain that sense of wonder, even though you've learned information. They still sort of blow your mind a little bit.
Yeah.
I know you work with lots of, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that the frontier of trying to find out more about these creatures it's still out there. We still don't know much about these animals at all. And the best example of that are beaked whales. They're big animals, and there was a new species 6 meters long that was named last year, and we had never really previously seen it before. It's only been known from strandings, and that's it. So there's
Wow.
still a lot of information that we need to know, not just about the past, but the current cetaceans or whales that we see today on our planet.
I know a fair few of my students really would like to be marine biologists, so there's opportunities for them there to, maybe
Yeah,
follow.
like I said, there is so much out there that we still don't know, and that's what really excites me, getting to fill the void and trying to piece out all of this information and try to make sense of the world in which we live in.
Um, I've been asking everybody this question. I guess we can't really avoid it with obviously the lockdown that's been going on over the last 9 or 10 weeks. Has that affected your job in any way, your ability to do things?
Look, it did. Unfortunately, when the lockdown came into effect, it meant that all the labs and the entire Melbourne Museum closed, which meant that I couldn't get access to a number of the specimens. Pardon me, the coffee's coming through. Yeah, so unfortunately, I wasn't able to get access to a number of different specimens. So I was just explicitly told, and I was given very special access, granted certain privileges, and it was fantastic that I was able to get that. And they said to me, Ben, go out in the field. Just go and collect anything and everything that you possibly can throughout this period. And when it lifts, you can just bring it back into the lab. And so I was like, fantastic. That's what I'm going to do. So I was given very special permission during the stage 3 restrictions to go out into the field and continue finding things. And we found some incredible things, and I'll show you one, right? So this is probably one of the most common things that I find. It always kind of blows people's minds just how big some of the stuff is, though. So, shark teeth are very common.
Oh,
This is one that's about 3 inches in size, so about 8 to 9 centimeters long. It comes from the precursor of the great white shark called Carcharodon australis. But, I found, there's that. I could have handfuls about that size of the ones that I found, just to give you an idea.
is that a lot bigger than modern day great white shark teeth? Because I've not been up close to one of those. Because a lot of the teeth seem to be quite small these days.
They are. So when you actually compare a tooth like this to a modern great white, they are very different, because the modern great white has these tiny little serrations or bumps that go all the way up the tooth itself that are perfect for sluicing through really hard mammalian prey matter. They're really good at doing that. These teeth, we think they're primarily focusing on a diet more like large fish, like billfish, for example. But there's really cool, and I know this is a side story, but there's really a fantastic fossil, again, in Peru, of an intermediate form of a great white that's starting to develop the serrations on the teeth. And the specimen is extraordinary. It's an entire jaw filled with teeth and vertebrae as well. You would never imagine it. So you find things like that. That's really cool as well. But you can also find even more important things like this as well. What do you think this is, Mandy, if you had to take a guess?
Oh my gosh, you're putting me on the spot there. Some kind of bone.
Yes, it is. Bone. It is definitely a small bone, but it comes from a penguin, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, so penguin bones are very rare to find in Bayside and in the fossil record, as well as a means when you compare it to things like sharks. And so this is part of the flipper bone. So this bone just here. And when you look at the modern fauna for penguins, you see that they're very different in terms of their size. I mean, little penguins are really cute. They're like this big. This is something that's getting to the size of a gentoo or a king penguin 5 million years ago. So I found that on the bottom of the seafloor, just resting on the surface. And I was like, aha, I know what that is. I'm taking it back with me.
So I guess part of the skill is that you actually recognize what you're looking for, as opposed to just randomly picking up stuff. And that's been built up over a number of years of, working in the
That's
field.
Exactly it. So I've got this kind of memory bank of all these different structures and surface and textures as well. What does bone look like when it's broken? Well, I only ever really find broken bone, and that's it. So I'm able to utilize that data bank in the back of my mind and go, that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like when enamel shatters in the middle, because that's usually the preservation status of most of these specimens. People think that when you do paleontology, you find these entire beautifully articulated skeletons, and that is just not the case at all. When we deal with the material that we're looking at, we find just like one tooth or part of a bone or something like that. But that one single bone can tell us a great deal of information. So I'll show you something else, for example.
Finding a whole skeleton would be like winning the lottery, wouldn't it?
It very much is. And I can honestly say there's been a couple of times where we have had that eureka moment. I can't talk about them, but they're very exciting, and they will be shown to the public at some point. I've just finished preparing a couple of those skeletons. They weren't from Bayside, they were from the Surf Coast. So it took down towards Torquay region, and they represent the first of an entirely new group of animals from Australia. They're really, really cool. But I found this the other day as well. And Mandy, do you recognize this by any chance?
Oh my goodness!
It's a really weird looking bone, and I'll give you a hint. It does come from a whale.
Is it the tympanic bone? I see. I made notes.
It is the tympanic bulla. And for paleontologists, it's really important. But so it's actually part of the ear bone, the external ear bone that hang from the bottom of the skull of a whale, specifically a baleen whale, specifically a right whale for this one here. And this was found at a relatively new locality that we discovered back in 2018. And it would have been in about 3 meters of water, and I held my breath and I went down, and I could just see this weird little cup-like formation in the sand, and most of it was completely buried. And I got my hand and just shucked it out of the sand, and I was like, oh, cool. It's one of the most diagnostic bones that you can find of a whale in the fossil record. When you find a bone like this, you can determine a lot about what the animal was doing throughout its life and how old it got, and exactly, what kind of potentially even species level recognition from a bone like this. So for paleontologists in particular, even though this is a really important bone for whales because it enables them to hear things underwater, for us it's even more important because we can say on the basis of just a few ear bones that entire groups of whales were on the map and in this particular area many millions of years ago.
Am I right in thinking that you can, like you said, you can age the whale from that? It has almost like growth rings?
Their teeth, we definitely can do that with. Ear bones, I am not aware of it in the literature. I wouldn't be shocked if you probably could, or somebody developed a technique in the future where you probably could do that.
Okay.
Sperm whale teeth, though, are a different matter. That is something that you could potentially do, because what they do is they cyclically add something called cementum to the outside of the tooth, and they do it seasonally as well to make the tooth fatter and thicker. So theoretically, if you cut the tooth in half, you could find an age, but there are a lot of variables that impact that. That's also, us saying, is a season 5 million years ago the same as what a season is now? And we don't know that.
Don't really know. Correct. Oh.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that we have to assume there, and it's dangerous to assume these things. So yeah, that's just paleontology in a nutshell.
Oh, you make it sound, so amazing. And I'm sure some of my kids will be thinking, that's what I'm going to be. I know that you have a little series of screencast podcasts, I'm not sure what you call them, called A Fool's Experiment, that you've been doing in ISO. I've watched quite a few of them. They're very entertaining and hilarious, but they really do educate. So you can find them on both Facebook and Instagram, correct?
Yes, correct. So if you want to find them, just type in A Fool's Experiment, _Fools_experiments, and you'll find me, and you can watch them, and you can see me be silly and talk about the history of life as a whole. The most recent episode was orientated towards one single bone that was found in Bayside, and it basically told us that there was an entire group of animals called the demon ducks of doom. These horrific looking giant flightless birds that lived 5 million years ago in southern Australia. And when you look at them, they look horrific. We found more complete skeletons of them up north in Alcuda, and more later Oligocene specimens as well. And they're bizarre looking animals. Just if you're interested, I would recommend you go and have a look. It's great fun.
Awesome. So guys, check it out. Obviously, you know, you've got to be very mindful of social media and ask your parents permission or go through, because you won't have Facebook yourselves. And so, but it is definitely worth checking out. One last question, Ben, before I let you go. Is there something that you haven't seen or found yet that you're really hoping to see?
Yeah, so there are times where I'm sleepless at night, you know, because I had a dream, and I'm just living the dream, and I think to myself, man, I'd love to find a specimen like that, you know. In early March, we found a specimen like that, and I can't tell you exactly what it is, but it was incredible, and I never thought I would ever see the day when I would find something like that, ever, you know. And I was like, wow, this is world class, this is crazy. We're going to hopefully announce it towards the end of the year, and it is really one of the most important specimens that have ever been found, not just in the state of Victoria, but also Australia as well, because of what it is and what it represents. And it's just so incredibly bizarre. But yeah, if there's one animal that I want to find in the fossil record, and if there's one skull that could be found, I want to find that giant great white whale, the Moby Dick Leviathan, the killer sperm whale. If we were able to find a skull of that animal, we could start answering some really, really fantastic questions, such as what did it eat and how did it hunt, and a whole bunch of unique questions that we could phase into it. It is just such a unique and fascinating animal, and quite possibly the biggest predator that has ever existed on our planet. Like the biggest. I mean, I know blue whales are predators, but they're eating tiny little krill and, you know, small fish. You know,
they're not hunters, are they? They're not sort of targeting, and
they're not going after the animals in the back of your picture. You know, that's what, if I could find one thing, and that would be it for the rest of my life. If I found the skull of a Leviathan down here, of a killer sperm whale, you know, and this is a skull that's 3 meters long, the size of a small car, their teeth are the size of artillery shells. The biggest tooth ever found in the holotype specimen in Peru was 36 centimeters long, the biggest functional tooth ever found in the animal kingdom. So
wow.
It's jaw-dropping, just the sheer statistics of this animal alone. So yeah, if we found that would be really cool. I'd love that.
Oh, fantastic. And I wish you all the luck, and I hope you do find one, and I look forward to hearing about this new exciting discovery at the end of the year.
Yeah,
Ben, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you this morning. I really appreciate your time, and yeah, hope to see you out in the field someday.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Mandy. And if there are any follow-up questions, feel free to ask, and I'm more than happy to answer as well. Thanks a lot.
Do that. Thank you.